So there's a lot of talk about, NATO, and Trump, Styx correctly, pointed out, I'm not against the idea of NATO either, but I am for the idea of them paying their own share. And I'm also very keenly aware that NATO is really just for everyone else. When NATO was formed back in the 70s, 60s? No, when was it formed? Weren't they? It was
I think it was the 60s.
Like they were worried. Yeah. It was about if World War II was fresh on our mind, and like all this kind of stuff. Like the reality of NATO in
the
a
US
day
mission
with
is saying it was formed in 1949, but by the signing of the Washington Treaty. That's earlier than I expected.
Okay, yeah, 49 is correct. So this is after
April 4th. We're almost on its anniversary.
Yeah. Aw.
We'll have to give it some flowers.
Yeah, well, perhaps at its funeral. I think that most Americans will agree, NATO does not pay their share. Styx, when you said you're pro-NATO, I wanted to get your take on, kind of this bubbling up call. I'm not saying you're like a NATO simp, but what are some pros of NATO, and what do you make of this push now to get out?
Well, NATO is the largest military alliance that the world has ever seen. And along with the other alliances the U.S. is part of in East Asia and Latin America under the Monroe Doctrine, etc., it forms the largest corpus of military might that the world has ever seen by far. It far exceeds literally anything else we've ever seen. The problem is that NATO had been neglected for this entire time. The United States pulled all the weight, and it's like the United States was the oxen, and everyone in Europe and South America and East Asia were just people on the cart behind the ox. That's the problem. As long as everyone pays their fair share and buffs up their militaries, well, everything's perfectly fine. I agree with increasing the U.S. military, actually, in size and scope. I mean, at least get rid of the fucking wokeness. Get those recruitment numbers up. We can do that by using Doge, ironically. Cut the wasteful spending and simply pay the troops and build more aircraft carriers and build more planes and preferably retrofit the A-10 Warthog. Like that.
Yeah,
I'm obsessed with that particular topic. People may have noticed.
Yeah, I mean, what do you make of it, Anna Claire? I think most people would at least say there's a lot of money owed, and people are sick of of America basically being NATO. Even some of the more modernized countries in the world still don't commit anywhere near enough. 1-2% of their GDP. Trump says these people should be committing up to 5% of their GDP. Not to mention the billions that they're behind, for the last 20 years, 30 years that they have not been. I mean, what do you make of, the real reason people are worried about leaving NATO right now is that obviously there's an issue if, NATO alliance, the 5th article or whatever, forces us to go to war. What do you make of the call? Do you think that there's anything serious? I mean, there are politicians calling for it in the United States. This isn't just people on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, I don't personally feel like America gets a lot of benefits from being involved in NATO. I think NATO is too costly for the U.S. to really justify continuing to subsidize. That's not to say at one point it wasn't necessary. That's not to say there aren't benefits at all. And especially for Europe, I understand why you guys all want to have some sort of coalition and work together and have mutual security interests. It's not illogical. It's just in reality, it doesn't seem like it's benefiting the U.S. the way that it should. A lot of the narrative around the U.S.'s involvement in global politics to me seems like this weird entitlement from other countries. And it's so interesting to see at home this, populist support for Doge, making the government more efficient, introducing better spending, having an evaluations of what are you guys doing and where you're spending it and is this the best way. Meanwhile, when they close down USAID, you get all these reports that all of these foundations in other countries that treat like AIDS or whatever, any kind of disease, they're saying, well, the US is about to make us all sick if they don't continue to give us our money. If this is a problem, why don't you guys find a way to fund it? I'm not saying that the US shouldn't support certain efforts, but generally, I think that the idea that everyone can simultaneously be like, wow, the US is so selfish and bad, and Trump is out of control and crazy. Also, give us your money. You owe this to us. Like, why would anyone want to be involved in this? And I feel like so much of the conversation stems from this idea that the US has to be the backer of NATO and conform to NATO's will, even when NATO isn't willing to acknowledge that they're not paying their fair share, or that some of the things they do are wasteful.
Yeah, and the thing is, the United States is expected to be Atlas. We literally have to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders all of the time. And then if we shrug a little bit, to use a little bit of a pun, then people, they don't respect us anymore. It's like, we've defended your nation almost singularly for like 70 years or something like that. Can't you show a little bit of respect?
Or pay your share.
Humility?
Shouldn't part of NATO be like, you have to bring something to the table? This whole like, Ukraine should be a part of NATO. What does Ukraine bring? They have no military, no money, and they're corrupt beyond all recognition. Not that most nations are corrupt, but what exactly do they bring to NATO?
Yeah, German
other than taking 100%. Yeah, they take 100% of they are benefiting 100%, and everyone else is taking 100% of the risk. That's not how deals are supposed to be done.
Yeah.
But they just sold it on this sort of soft,
with cardboard guns. So
right.
They sort of sold it on this soft emotional plea. Oh, the people of Ukraine are being oppressed by the Russian people. Never mind the fact that there's a very complicated history between the two countries. Like, it seems like if you can,
what about those ethnically Russian Ukrainians who wanted to go back to Russia? People don't know that they exist.
That's like what they said all the time. Like they are just like subjected to Russian propaganda.
But didn't they devalue their votes or something, or throw their votes out in some election? I could be wrong about that.
There were all kinds of efforts to like suppress certain areas of Ukraine, from what I understand.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think that, regional conflict that we don't have a direct understanding gets sold to the American people as like, Russia's the bad guy, and so therefore we have to be opposed to everything Russia does at all times in all places. And when it was like, we hate communism, I could kind of get it, except we work with China all the time. So like, what is your specific what is your specific objection? Like, again, you don't like Putin? Fine. Tell me why, but don't just be like, because Russia is bad. I think that's what
most people can answer. Did you see that viral tweet that was kind of like, basically like, hey, I was in 3rd grade during 9/11. I've never had any kind of weird interactions with, Russia ever. Tell me again why I'm supposed to hate them. Like, most people alive today have no idea why Russia bad. That's all they know is Russia bad. I'm not pro-Russia. I think communism's bad. I think that there's a lot of problems there, but that's why I don't live there.
I think communism is bad, but we still work with China. Like, why is one we're willing to tolerate the other? I mean, I know part of it is just economic. China has so much of our economy in a stranglehold, but still, like, so what? We just get to be like blind eye to this situation and everyone be mad at that guy? Like, that seems stupid to me.
Yeah, I would like to point out that the legacy media used to crucify Ukraine for its legendary levels of corruption.
2014.
Until the war started.
Yeah, it's not even that long ago. 2014, they were publishing articles calling Ukraine the most corrupt nation in the world. Gee, I wonder why our biolabs were there. I'm sure there's no coincidence why American biolabs were in Ukraine.
And you don't have to like Putin to understand that Ukraine is also corrupt and that Zelensky's corrupt.
Right. So it doesn't make one better because you dislike the other one more.
Yeah, Putin decided to outlaw memes about him, which obviously none of us, I think, support.
No.
But is Zelensky any better? Not
Right.
really.
The Ukraine is supposed to, from what I have read, it's one of the capitals of surrogacy in the world. It's where a lot of people go to have surrogate mothers carry their eggs. There's a ton of, I mean, this was like in the beginning days, like people being like, but I needed to get my baby or whatever. Like,
Yeah, right. That you
if
bought.
you
Yeah.
if
And
you're
child
someone in the
trafficking.
US who's like anti-surrogacy, or you have questions about IVF or whatever else, like, would you be able to be pro-Ukraine if that's a major industry there? I don't know. I mean, it's up to your conscience, I guess, but they just kind of gloss over the things that are sketchy about Ukraine.
And Russia stopped being communist effectively, right? I mean, in the 90s, allegedly, I don't know what are they technically called nowadays?
It's a mixed economy. It's more like China.
Yeah, because I mean, they very clearly side with communist nations. Their allyships are with China and other communist nations. So I think to pretend like they have no communist roots or anything to do with communism is absurd. But I mean, I'm just saying that as I don't have any issues with Russia. I'm not pro-Russian though. Like, how do we deal with this false equivalency that the American media keeps saying? Like, I'm not pro-Russia, but I'm not pro-Ukraine either. And they're kind of successfully smearing anybody who's like anti-war as being pro-Putin. Like,
well, they don't have a realistic understanding of how you're supposed to deal with international diplomacy. Like, it's okay to invite that, to invite the president of China to the U.S., even though, again, ties to communism, questionable treatment of free speech. There's the direct interference in our economy. But if Trump gets on the phone with Putin and is like, hey, dude, seems like this war should come to the end. What are your thoughts on this? They act like he is just in his pocket. I mean, it was the same thing when he negotiated with North Korea. And there are certain people you're supposed to shun, even though that doesn't make sense, because if you're actually trying to end a war, you have to bring all parties to the table. But then certain places where you could have the same kind of criticism, oh, it's okay to talk to them. We like them. It's no big deal. I mean, it's like a policy set by middle school girls. One day you're not allowed to talk to this person. You can't question why. It's very emotional and arguably extremely illogical.
It's like the Vietnam War. If you came out and said it doesn't make sense, which it didn't, or it wasn't justified, which it wasn't, all of a sudden you were a commie, a hippie, and stuff like that. And people don't know this strange historical fact. Most of the people that were against the Vietnam War were older people.
Right.
The youth was more in favor of the goddamn war. They were all gung-ho for the Star-Spangled Banner because of the propaganda, but the older generation had fought in World War II, knew what war was like, and said, and Korea, and said, no, this is not a good idea.
By the way, for somebody in chat said that China hates Russia, or vice versa. That's simply not true. 7 days ago, Chinese President Xi Jinping said that history and reality show that China and Russia are good neighbors and cannot be moved away, and true friends who share weal and woe, support each other, and achieve common development. I don't know. It's so weird how people can state something so confidently that's just so completely wrong.
There was one instance of the Chinese screwing Putin, though.
There is.
You remember years and years ago, they had that fuel deal, and they built that pipeline to China to supply them with fuel. And then Putin went over for a state visit and left early because they screwed him on the total.
And who didn't? And who bailed Russia out when they got all the trade embargoes went into place? It was China.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I don't really, I don't really buy that.